Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. We have a lot to get into this week. The Panthers got their first dub of the year in Las Vegas. Very exciting. A lot to get into breaking down that game and different topics around the NFL. What were some of the things that you took away from that dominant win against the Raiders?
Yeah, well, it wasn't just a win. It was a blowout, right? And the score might not reflect it, the final score, but they were down really big heading into the fourth quarter. A lot of the production they had, I would say, is garbage time production, especially when Aiden O'Connell had to come in and they got that one play to, I believe it was Trey Tucker in the back of the end zone, where that was actually a really long run on play. I was kind of mad that we allowed that to happen. It was like a 10-second play. But that's neither here nor there. Panthers got their first win. It always feels good to celebrate a win, to talk about a win, like with you on the recording here. And it's just nice. Andy Dalton comes in, and not only was he a competent QB, which is what we kind of wanted to see. Hey, can the offense function? That was why Canales made the decision. He was throwing darts out there, okay? They call him the red rifle. He was firing kill shots. That throw to Adam Thielen for the touchdown, one of, if not the best touchdown throws I've seen all year. Maybe Jaden Daniels' pass to Terry McLaurin supplants that, the one he threw last night. He's looked really good, by the way. But Andy Dalton came out firing on all cylinders, and it led to that win.
It did. I mean, from the opening drive till a good portion in the third quarter when we were putting the final stamp on kind of the victory, he was layering throws all over the field. I mean, he had a couple beautiful ones to the outside on the first drive, a little 5-yard out to Thielen to kind of start the first series, and then hits Deontay Johnson on like a 15, 20-yard out route. And then just the throws across the middle, I mean, were just darts. Tommy Tremble to get us down inside the 5-yard line. The throw to Xavier Legette between two defenders that allowed him to kind of run and get huge yak. I mean, that was why we drafted a guy like Legette, was the yak ability once you put the ball in his hands. And we're having now competent quarterback play. And I think it's even a little bit better than competent. Like you said, he was firing kill shots. And I'm just curious, do you think this is something that's going to continue? Or is this like a Fitz magic, Fitz mania kind of scenario where he's going to come in, look good for a game or two, and then he's going to kind of, I wouldn't say like relapse, but I just don't know if he's going to keep this kind of play up the entire year.
Well, that's the question, right? Is this a flash in the pan? Like, hey, a new guy comes in. We don't have a ton of tape on Andy Dalton from the past couple seasons. Granted, he's played in the league a long time, just not so much recently. That's the question. Can he string it together? And it's going to be important because he has a revenge game against the team who drafted him here in Charlotte this upcoming week. The Bengals are coming to town, so will be interesting. But I think Dalton is more than primed to be able to put together another strong performance. I don't know if it's going to be as dominant as this week, considering one, we have Adam Thielen on IR now. He's quite literally sacrificed his hamstring for that touchdown, and it was a beautiful play there. But going to be missing him for a few weeks. It's going to be interesting, right? And we're kind of jumping ahead into like past the positives and negatives into some of the takeaways of this game, but the talk around the league, especially this past week in football media, was our too high safety defenses ruining the NFL, right? Mel Kiper, a draft guy who doesn't say much outside of the draft, went on air, I think it was Tuesday morning, maybe Wednesday morning, was like, the NFL needs to ban too high defenses. And quarterback play has been down quite a bit throughout the first 3 weeks now. And you saw Andy Dalton kind of shredding the Raiders too high looks. And you kind of have to think, well, maybe is he just a veteran QB who's used to it? Are young QB struggling? You got to think he played in the AFC North for a decade. He had to go against the Steelers defenses that had Troy Polamalu roaming around in the back there, James Harrison bearing down pressure. He had to face the Ravens defense with Ray Lewis before he retired, Terrell Suggs, and Ed Reed back there. He's used to these defenses. The defenses he's seen today are pieces of cake. He is willing to thread that ball between the seam, like we saw to Thielen, like we saw to Tremble downfield. He threaded it between the Raiders linebackers quite often. You talked about the Legette play where he got some good yak. He did it a couple times with Deontay Johnson as well, and Johnson made some moves downfield and got him some yak opportunities as well. I think Andy Dalton and a lot of these older quarterbacks are more equipped today to play some of these looks because the too high look, is kind of cyclical. It came back once the big offensive boom happened once Mahomes really took over, like from 2018 to 2022, that really strong period of offense. Now we're seeing defenses come back. I think he's equipped to handle it. I think we'll see, like if Aaron Rodgers is fully healthy, I think he'll be able to take advantage of it. Maybe Kirk Cousins, who's been around for a while, he might be able to. And obviously the Mahomes and Josh Allen's like the really good players there. But Andy Dalton's used to these stout defenses, and I think he's going to be able to carve them up as long as that O-line gives him the protection, which they did. We are second in pressure rate allowed, which is something huge that I feel like is being underappreciated for this team. I can't recall when this team has ever been that good at pass protection, at least dating back to before Cam was here, maybe that 2008 season.
2015 was good, but yeah, I don't think it was
good, but
five.
not second. Yeah. And I'm kind of rambling here, but my point being, Andy Dalton and the offense as it's currently structured is equipped to tear apart these defenses. And before we jump into a full like game breakdown of next week, you look at that Bengals defense last night versus Washington versus a Cliff Kingsbury college offense, which is what Cam Taylor-Britt, one of the Bengals corners, said about that offense. You look how they got shredded by a rookie QB. And I don't want to take anything away from Daniels. He clearly has it, but they are primed for another game of that defense getting filleted, and I am all here for it.
We will see what happens this coming Sunday when we host the Bengals. They're on a short week. They're 0-3. They're definitely very desperate. And there are a lot of concerns on the defensive side. And we'll see if that plays out, if Canales is able to take advantage. What I liked from Canales, and you saw it immediately on the first drive, is he started using motion a lot more. Mm-hmm. And the wide receiver in motion, if it was a pass play, tended to be the target. Xavier Legette on his big play on the first drive. Adam Thielen motion in and then came right back out to a slot position on the left side. And they found him on a 3rd and 2 when they brought pressure on that side for like a little gain, 5-yard gain, I believe, to convert the down. Come back to that exact same formation, show the Thielen motion. The defense stays kind of leaning to the left side, and they run it to the strong side of the offensive line on the right side. Chuba goes off for, I believe, a 12-yard gain or 8-yard gain, whatever it was. It was a good pickup. And again, it was just a recognition of you just saw this motion. Are we dropping back? They were covering the exact spot that Thielen would have been on that route, and instead they run it. Later on in the game, we're in a 21-person, which is usually a and a fullback, but instead we had Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, and the edge got caught up thinking that Chuba was going to block him, and he's trying to get the Miles Sanders, and Chuba just gashes him for, I think, another 10-plus yard gain. So again, love the different concepts that are being put out by Canales. I love that he is using motion a little bit more, but we're seeing a lot more just traditional dropbacks under center, especially with Andy Dalton in. I would like to see he's got the mobility to do more play action. Get him out in space. See if we can get a guy like Xavier Legette or Jonathan Mingo in space to make a big yak play. So that's all I kind of want to see moving forward. To your point about the Washington offense, Cam Taylor-Britt saying it's a college-style offense. It definitely is. There's a lot of screens. There's a lot of RPOs, and that opens up for the big shots that they were able to take and make last night.
Yeah, I hope he says something about our team so we can take advantage of it. Whatever he said so far has come true. He said Xavier Worthy only runs straight, and he did pick off a pass intended for Worthy a couple of weeks ago when they played the Chiefs. So hopefully he says, Andy Dalton can throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns again. Hopefully that happens. I'm a bit more skittish on Andy Dalton being as mobile as we're talking about here. I think that's if you want to compare him and Bryce Young, Bryce's mobility through the first 2 games, I think, clearly outshine Andy Dalton's. One of the negatives that I saw from this game is when the O-line got beat and there was pressure coming to him and that first guy wasn't there, it was kind of over for Andy Dalton. I believe he ended up taking 3 sacks in this game, and each one it's like, yeah, he's not getting away from that guy. This is going to be a sack kind of thing, but those were so few and far between that when those happened, we're able to rebound and convert after that. We converted quite a few 3rd and 10 pluses in this game. The only one I think we missed was the dirt ball to Thielen, which it was a really close one, but again, splitting hairs there. That's one of the negatives that I liked, and I think some of the penalties we could still clean up as well. Our DBs were playing frisky. You got to hand it to J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson. They locked Devontae Adams up. I believe he only had 4 catches this game. When we did the preview last week looking at this game, it was, what do they have to take care of? Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers. Those are the two guys for this offense, the Raiders offense, that were moving the ball for them. That's exactly what we did. Force them to use those third and fourth options, and that's how we got the win there. I really, really like how the defense played this past week. Hopefully we can parlay that into another strong defensive performance. And it all starts up front with the run. Alexander Mattison and Zamir White had no traction running the ball. And I know that those two aren't superstar running backs, so to speak, but the Bengals also don't have world beaters at that position either in Zach Moss and Chase Brown. Both of those guys can catch the ball a little bit out of the backfield, but they're not power runners like J.K. Dobbins was, who gashed us. Alvin Kamara gashed us when he was in the game week 1. So stout in the run game. We got 3 sacks, all from different people. Clowney finally got his first sack. He and I don't remember who the right tackle is because Thyre Munford left the game, but he just long-armed the guy off the snap and walked him back into Minshew, got a sack there. And we also had 2 sacks from interior guys, but all 3 of those, outside of the Clowney one, that was kind of quick, but the 2 interior ones came on like 4 or 5, 6 seconds into the play. I think we're still missing quick pressures, and that's another thing I'd like to see the defense explore and get better at. One thing I will say, though, is when Trevin Wallace was on defense, he played 10 defensive snaps. We saw him play a little bit more in that Luvu role, kind of like what we talked about on this podcast when he was drafted. He was coming off the edge as that 5th rusher. I think exploring stuff like that and using more blitzes is going to help the defense get some of those quick pressures. And that's what you kind of have to do against Joe Burrow going forward.
You do. And he's going to try to diagnose the play pre-snap. That's really his strong suit, is knowing where he's going to go with the football. He's got talented wide receivers in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And that's exactly what we're going to find ourselves in, is if we can put J.C. Horn on Chase and we're able to bracket T. Higgins, then it really comes down to Yoshevich, who had a good Monday Night Football game against the Commanders, of being the guy to step up. And Trey Tucker, he had a deep ball connection with Gardner Minshew on one of their opening drives. I don't think it was their first one, but it was the second drive they had that led to kind of the touchdown that was keeping them in it, so to speak, in that first half for a little bit. And Trey Tucker, they tried to go back to a couple of times, and between Mike Jackson making a play and just Trey Tucker not being able to catch the ball, we saw those tertiary options kind of fail and fall flat. And so if the Bengals aren't able to get anything going with their primary guys, that was able to take that away, nothing's going and working well on the ground for them, can a guy like Yoshevich kind of take over a game? And that's, I really think, going to be the X factor against them. So again, we're jumping ahead the next week, but it was things that we saw against the Raiders that if we can keep implementing those on defense, I feel really good about where our offense is right now, because like you said, second in the league in pressure rate. Our wide receivers, Deontay Johnson looks like a wide receiver 1, and feeding him the ball and getting him involved. I mean, seeing him work on slant routes and crossing routes. I mean, that touchdown pass was beautiful between him and Andy Dalton. And those were throws that we're watching Bryce Young miss him on in the first couple of weeks. So it's good to see him getting involved, making plays on offense. And I think as long as we keep building on this, there's a chance that we could be at least maybe competitive in a weaker NFC South.
Yeah, that's kind of looking forward for this team after watching this game. I think we have enough meat on the bone, enough gumption with this squad to be able to work with and defeat some of those bad teams and maybe hang with and compete with some of the more competitive teams. I'm not saying we're going to go out there and blast the Chiefs and the Eagles when we go on our gauntlet after the bye, but I think with this competent quarterback play, this team has enough there. I think I liked a lot of what I saw from Canales. You mentioned the motion and stuff bringing in. If the offense can continue to be successful, Jonathan Brooks gets back. We see what he has. This team can compete with teams similarly to how in 2020, even when we had, I would say, probably a worse quarterback in Bridgewater, we were able to compete with teams. We only ended up winning 5 games, but we were able to compete. We did have way more talent, McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore. But I think if you can stay competitive, that's a huge win, because when we came into the season, what was our goal for a successful season, right? Seeing offensive growth. It didn't happen how we thought it did, but if we can keep this going, that's going to be a win there. My biggest takeaway from this game, and both of us came on here and criticized and chastised the benching being this early in the season, but Dave Canales doing this, and it took guts to do it. He's won the locker room already, to come in and bench your quarterback after week 2 and say, all right, our backup is the best chance going forward for us to win, and it pays off the way it did. I think all the guys in there, except maybe Bryce Young, for now, are going to rally behind Canales' message about what he wants this team to be.
Do you still believe, and for me, listening to a bunch of different talk show hosts that weren't even affiliated with the Panthers, that were kind of connected ears to the ground with front offices, really did think that was a Tepper decision. So it did pay out. Canales was the guy that said, hey, this is what we're doing. But do you think that was a Canales decision? Because like we talked about last week, we felt like this Bryce Young experiment still needed to kind of be worked out for a few more weeks at the very least.
Yes and no. We know how impulsive David Tepper is, and I believe I came on here and said it reeks of a Tepper move. I still think it does. I think, they have those weekly, I think it's Monday weekly meetings or whatever they are, where Tepper talks about the game to the coaches, which I still think is bizarre. But when it came down to it, when push came to shove, Canales is the one who went into the locker room, went in front of everybody, maybe in a team meeting or whatever, and told them, hey, this is what we're doing. This is my decision. We're doing this. And it's from, I guess, him being the speaker for that and it working out, because not only did he say that, he also calls the offense and proved that, hey, our offense is functional. And if we get an Andy Dalton in there to make it look functional, things can work. I think that's what people are going to rally behind, because you look at some of the clips after the game from guys in the locker room, like Robert Hunt and stuff like that. They were juiced up about the win. And you saw it translating to the field, right? Where I don't remember who it was. I think it was Robert Spillane on that run play, Chuba to the left. I think it was Chuba. He tossed that guy with one arm and just threw him over and it helped lead to a big run game there. When you have everybody bought in and people not Thielen on the sideline, throwing his helmet down, stuff like that. All the offense, all the defense, because they're not gassed, when everybody buys in and rallies behind a coach who, if it's his decision or not, he told the people in the locker room that it was his decision. When they can rally behind that, I think that's a win for the culture, the culture of holding everybody accountable. And it's a win for Coach Canales, because in the first 2 weeks, it's like, all right, stuff might not work the way we want it to. No, it does work. And now that we've made this decision, we can move forward knowing that that's what our offense can do. That's why I think it's kind of a win there for him.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good take to have in terms of him being able to rally these guys together after going down 0-2 and getting the doors and brakes beaten off of you to rally around and have such a dominant performance. And really
dominant performance on the road too. I don't think that can be understated as well, because we had to travel across the country and get this win in their stadium as well.
Yeah, no. And it's again, I'm trying to remember the one song, but what is it? Dance on Your Trap or something. I'm rambling now at this point, but there's a little rap song that got played when we won. And it's true. When you're able to go into an opposing stadium and steal the win, especially when they're coming off a huge victory against Baltimore on the road themselves, that can't be stated enough to kind of deflate them. And it got to the point where Antonio Pierce is saying that some of the starters, they might make some business decisions on them and go to Aiden O'Connell. And so things that we had to kind of go through the past week, they might be doing in the next week or two. So it's always cool when you're able to kind of flip that narrative and really rally behind the offensive line that we built. Like, that was the centerpiece, the focal point of the offseason, and that's what allowed us to run for 150 plus yards, allowed Andy Dalton to have the time to find receivers and keep moving the chains. So with that all being said,
quick too, I want to butt in real quick. Another big winner from this game is Dan Morgan. We talked about perceptions for both of them last week, following the benching. The two guards that he signed, paving the way for us, played excellent. Deontay Johnson, whom he traded for, showed what he can do. Mike Jackson, who he also traded for, traded our 7th round pick away for, and that pick was subsequently cut from the Seahawks. Mike Jackson looks like a bona fide corner too.
Yeah.
And I know, from being your friend, we've been lacking a corner too for so long. Going back to the, you brought him up a couple of weeks ago, the Corn Elder days, Darryl Worley, Zach Sanchez. So it's really good to have a corner two you can depend on. All this is coming from Dan Morgan's moves so far. So I think he was a big winner from this win as well.
Absolutely. And just before we move on, so I don't sound like a completely crazy person, the song I was thinking about was Take Over Your Trap, and it's walk in your trap and take over your trap is the line I was thinking about. Just wasn't there at the time being, had to track that down. But moving from the Panthers and all the bright spots that we had with Dave Canales and Ejiro Evero and just the team victory, I think this is a good pivot point to get into coach talk and really highlight a tweet from Billy Marshall, a co-host or host of the Roar podcast. Always a great listen, really sound analysis. And he was talking about kind of play callers and coaches who are able to develop players and put them in a position to succeed. So it goes back to what we talked about last week. And we're criticizing Canales about is that you are not building a scheme around the quarterback. You're asking your quarterback and other players to adapt to your scheme. And I think when you do that, you lose the ability to hit on explosives and minimize negative plays because they're playing in an uncomfortable position. So I think guys that have done a great job, and we can break them down, at putting guys in the best position possible are Matt LaFleur, Mike Tomlin, and Kevin O'Connell. Two of those guys are undefeated. One is 2-1. And they look like really complete teams at almost the quarter mark at this point in the season. Which guy do you think is the best at putting their guys in the best position to succeed?
Well, it's hard to not talk about Mike Tomlin in this role, right? He's been doing this for, is this season 16 or 17 now? I think it's 16, where they don't have losing seasons. That's one thing to speak of. He handles the locker room well. We didn't know anything about Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown's distastes for other players and stuff like that while they were on that team. He controlled that really well. And he's able to take a guy in Justin Fields who, before the season, we probably didn't think he was going to start, right? He had a really poor preseason, to be honest, and it gave Russell Wilson the legs to take that starting job and run with it. But Russell Wilson slips and falls. He gets injured a little bit, and Fields has to step in. And I don't think he's being a world beater at quarterback by any means, but he's playing within his structure. They're 3-0 with Fields as the starter. I think Arthur Smith as well is coaching really well, coming off of that, we'll call it an embarrassment of a head coaching job in Atlanta. I think Tomlin's able to get the people who might be outcasts for other teams, coaches included, and bring them in and have them work in a functional environment. I think the other big one that you have to look at is Matt LaFleur, right? He took Rodgers, who, after McCarthy was fired, was probably disgruntled, kind of wanted to do things his way, and over time kind of fused and melded the Rodgers offense with his own offense, led to, I think it was 3 straight 13-win seasons, 2 MVPs from Rodgers. Obviously, that last year they falter a bit, injuries, young receivers that Rodgers hasn't played with before. They slip and fall. Rodgers is out of there. Jordan Love, who's been there for 3 years at that point, hasn't really played NFL football, takes him, has a really good year with him. This year, Jordan Love, I don't recall the exact injury that he sustained in week 1 versus the Eagles, but he's out for, at the time they said it could be half the year. Now it's looking like he might be back sooner rather than later, but they traded for Malik Willis to start the season, the former Titans 3rd round pick QB, who got all of like half a season before the Titans decided, all right, we're done with you. You're not the guy. Bring him in. Tailored the game plan for Willis these first couple weeks, and especially this week, Willis looked really, really good. He was making really strong throws and making plays with his legs on the ground, something in the draft we thought about, hey, this could be a strength of this guy, and he led them to a pretty strong win. And so these 2 weeks, I don't want to put it as like a Jordan Love versus Malik Willis thing record-wise, but they're bringing in a backup who they traded for a month ago. He didn't do training camp with him. He wasn't there over the summer. And LaFleur is able to tailor his game plan and work around the strengths of his players. I think that is one of the strengths of Matt LaFleur, and it's a big reason why both of us had him ranked as a super strong or a pretty high coach when we did our top 10 rankings. I believe I had him as my highest non-Super Bowl winning coach other than Shanahan, and I just had Shanahan higher because he's been there a bunch. Super, super solid coach.
Yeah, no, I think I had him top 3. I thought this was really Matt LaFleur's breakout year. And I think when Love gets back in the fold and they really hit their stride, it looks like some of the issues that they had on defense are getting fixed with Jeff Hafley. I mean, Xavier McKinney 3 straight games with an interception. He's a guy that will probably be talked about as a defensive player of the year candidate if they keep rattling off kind of these turnovers and are able to play complementary football. And that's great to see. So I know that's a little side tangent. I'm just going to stop saying that word. Tangential. There we go. In regards to the Packers is that they have so many playmakers. And I think Matt LaFleur isn't forcing Malik Willis to be Jordan Love. He wasn't asking Jordan Love to be Aaron Rodgers, even though Jordan Love does try some throws in an Aaron Rodgers-esque way. And that's what's cool is when a coach that's able to do it. We saw it with Kevin O'Connell last year. You have Kirk Cousins go down and you trade for a Josh Dobbs. And immediately, I mean, week of when you trade him, like you talked about Malik Willis being brought in and only having a couple weeks to learn it. Josh Dobbs only had a couple days and they ended up winning that game. And Dobbs was a huge reason why. So it's awesome to see when you have some of these head coaches and play callers that are able to take some of these pieces and make it work. Now, I would say like an argument against the playmakers that the Packers and the Vikings have on offense are amazing. I mean, the homegrown talent on both O-lines are phenomenal. The wide receiver options are great. I mean, Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the league for a reason. And that helps when you have a quarterback that has struggled with negative plays to be able to know like, hey, I'm going to throw the ball up and you're just going to be able to make a play because you're the better guy. And so that's awesome to have those pieces. I think Mike Tomlin, his job over the past, as you said, almost 2 decades at this point, is been nothing short of phenomenal. I mean, he wins the Super Bowl with Big Ben. They have some defensive regression when their offense kind of hits a boom in the 2010s, and now it's like they're revamping that offense, and it's working. Arthur Smith isn't trying to galaxy brain things. He's allowing Fields to work within the scope of works best for him, and that's not throwing across the middle. I mean, I think the first week or two, he didn't attempt to throw across the middle because he didn't have to. And then when he did this past week against the Chargers, they hit a big play that ended up icing the game with I think it was like a 50-plus yard touchdown, most of that being Yak. But again, when you have a quarterback that is now starting to get comfortable and being able to play in rhythm, if you're able to start layering some of that in there and Fields starts being comfortable in those settings, your offensive playbook starts opening up. And so the Steelers could start becoming very dangerous, especially with George Pickens' ascendance. So really love those 3 guys. I think to kind of wrap up coach talk, it's guys that are their scheme or the highway. And you bring up on this list here, Frank Reich, a guy that got fired, a guy that got canned, who was trying to fit all the offensive pieces into his system rather than installing plays in a playbook that would complement the strengths of the offense. A couple other guys that you have here is Nick Sirianni. I wrote Brian Callahan, but anything that you want to touch on with Reich and leading in the Sirianni, especially since Sirianni coached under Reich in Indy.
Yeah, it's about those first 3 guys we talked about, Tomlin, LaFleur, and Kevin O'Connell. It's about accentuating your players' strengths, right? They're taking guys they didn't draft and they're making it work for them. They're being less prideful, like willing to bend their scheme to it, I think is the way to put it. There's less pride, hubris there, whatever you want to call it. We saw with Frank Reich last year when things weren't working well, they gave play calling to Thomas Brown. He took it back despite Thomas Brown coaching the team to a win. Like one of our only wins, actually both of our wins were when he called plays because one was after Reich got fired. But you saw him wrangling with control there. You hear Frank Reich saying after we got beat down, not being able to run the ball, that, we saw the tape last year with the Panthers O-line. We know that they're a good downhill running O-line, but that's not what we're going to do. When you do things like that, it leads to you getting fired pretty quickly when you're not able to work to the strengths of your young quarterback, to the strengths of your offensive line that, while it dealt with injuries, it was dominant the year before in the run game. Steve Wilkes had them churning out franchise records against teams, talking about that Lions game and the frozen tundra of Charlotte that week. Then Nick Sirianni, like we're talking about, who does have the little right connection there. Over the offseason, he was there were some quotes where he was throwing players under the bus. And ever since not having Steichen there, the offense just seems kind of not one-dimensional, but it doesn't seem to be working. I don't want to take away from what Steichen was able to do. Obviously, he had Hurts playing at an MVP level, and Hurts hasn't been close to that level since then, quite frankly. And I don't want to put it all on Hurts, but there has been quite a regression there, despite them going out getting Saquon Barkley, AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith having another year together. It's just not working there. And then Brian Callahan, I think this will lead well into like our next segment, but the early returns are not super, super promising for the Titans. I do think their defense is playing at a high level, but it's hard for me to tell if it's all on Callahan when Levis is having, I guess, one frame or one picture per game where he's just throwing up a magnificent pose after a pick six or a fumble. So I'm not sure there, but I guess you can speak more to Callahan.
Yeah, we'll touch on Sirianni first because, like you said, Callahan's a good segue into the next segment. With Sirianni, you can't show that there's division in the locker room. In press conferences, throwing players underneath the bus, that's just not – you don't see a guy like Mike Tomlin doing that. I would argue that Mike Tomlin is one of the best leaders of men, so to speak, when you look at like head coaches from that standpoint. He is phenomenal. I think the situation that we're seeing with Tua in Miami – I don't think he would even question like starting Tua the rest of the year. I think he would very much convince Tua to retire, like we saw Antonio Pierce talk about a couple of weeks ago when that injury. And we haven't seen that like affirmation with Mike McDaniel. And I know that's a side tangent, but when you go to Nick Sirianni and you're talking about a locker room and being able to have a presence, you can't throw your key players underneath the bus. What I will say, like with Hurts, he hurts himself so many times bailing from a clean pocket and cutting the field in half. And sometimes when you have to have those tough conversations, you have to do kind of what Brian Flores did when he was in Miami. And that's you have these conversations in the meeting rooms, behind closed doors, when there are no cameras. If you have grievances to air and things to correct on the field, do them behind closed doors. There's no reason to do that in front of a camera. I will say Kellen Moore is installing a more traditional offense. And if Hurts starts playing more in rhythm, this is a team that can start piecing it together. Vic Fangio and that defensive line are starting to figure things out. Jordan Davis, I believe, had a nice sack this past week. Jalen Carter is starting to dominate. And we saw them stop the high-powered Saints offense and keep them under 20 points after they reeled off 40-plus in the previous 2 weeks. So I think things will pick up in Philly. We'll see if Nick Sirianni's still the guy. That's a guy I'm not as worried about. With Brian Callahan, you know you don't have a good offensive line. The quick game there isn't necessarily as great. And to have so many route concepts, like when you see with the Bears, the pick six, having those route concepts where he even thinks that's a viable option to throw, that's what leads to pick six because corners sit on those routes. That's what Jair Alexander just did to him this past week. And when you have those big plays that just swing the momentum of the entire game, that's how you lose games. And Will Levis has played phenomenally. You just need to make sure you're mitigating those opportunities where you can have those back-breaking plays. Otherwise, he's just going to become a meme. This team's going to continue the spiral, and it's not going to work out for him. And that's unfortunate because I think Brian Callahan has a lot to offer this league. He just needs to make sure that he's putting his offense in the best position to succeed, just like a Matt LaFleur or Kevin O'Connell. We just haven't quite seen that materialize yet.
Yeah, for sure. Like you were talking about, I think the defense has played great. To your point about the offensive line, I saw something earlier today that J.C. Latham is one of the better linemen so far this year at not allowing pressure. So that's a bright spot there for them, their first-round pick this season. I think this is a good segue into around the NFL this weekend. Instead of highlighting one or two games we want to talk about, I think it's time to look at records because 0-3 is a very damning record if you're trying to make the playoffs. We're talking about the Titans here. They are one of three teams that are 0-3 so far, and I believe it's only four teams since 1970, so the merger, that have started 0-3 have ever made the playoffs. The most recent one was 2018 Houston with Deshaun Watson. That's when I think they started 0-3 and ended up like 10-6, I think, that year, got in the wild card round. That was the year they lost to the Bills. Anyway, we have three 0-3 squads like we talked about. The Titans, we've seen their struggles. Will Levis is struggling, quite frankly, just to function. He is becoming a meme like you're talking about. We talked about the Cincinnati Bengals, who we will host this week. They always seem to start slow since Burrow's been there, but I think it's a little bit worse this year because Chase and Higgins and Burrow all haven't been together enough yet. We'll have to see next week how that works out. But I think the biggest one for me and the most concerning, we're going to kind of pick out which teams we think are most concerning out of each category here. The Jacksonville Jaguars got destroyed.
34-3 at halftime.
Yeah, you want to talk about the Panthers week one? Even though I'm giving it the week one tax, it wasn't that bad. This was week 3. You have the scouting report on the Bills. You know what they're about. And it was 34-3. They obviously end up getting destroyed that game. Josh Allen played phenomenally. Everybody on the Bills played phenomenally. Lawrence throws the pick to DeMar Hamlin. Mac Jones ends up coming in the fourth quarter, a fumble on the very first play. It was just a complete meltdown for the Jags. And of all 3 of these teams, I think all of them were within a stone's throw of stiff in the playoffs. Maybe the Titans were outside, but I thought the Bengals would really contend for the division this year once everybody was healthy, and that remains to be seen. But the Jags as well, I think, deserved a mention in the wild card department. I don't see it happening at this point from now on. Doug Peterson, I'm not sure if his key fob is going to work when they get back to Jackson. I don't know if they're back there already yet. You know, the meme of Jamal Adams where he's like, I can't believe they cut me. That might be Doug Peterson today or tomorrow. I don't know, but this is a complete meltdown for them. In their last 9 regular season games, they are 1-8, and they just look horrible. I think the Panthers have played better in their last 9 regular season games than the Jaguars, which is funny because we came in the league at the same time. And yeah, that's inflated by the Andy Dalton game here, but they have just looked hapless ever since they were, week 12 last year, where they were 8-3, 96% chance to make the playoffs. Since then, it has been a complete nosedive, and I don't see any way out of this for them other than maybe firing the coach and getting a super strong person with the top 3 pick next year.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what's going wrong in Jacksonville because there are throws that Trevor Lawrence is making that wide receivers are dropping, and then there are throws he's just not making. That overthrow that Hamlin picks, Brian Thomas is wide open right there. You got to make those throws. You got paid $55 million a year. Start throwing like you're paid that. And I understand that pay doesn't always equate to performance, and we've seen that multiple times over the past couple of years with extensions for guys like Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson. But I think when you really look at the Jaguars, and I thought they made a lot of the right upgrades, bringing in Ryan Nielsen, bringing in a guy like Eric Armstead, and it's just not there. And it's worrisome. The Titans, they have a first-year head coach, second-year quarterback. These growing pains are expected. They can still rally and win 6-7 games and really salvage this season and show that they're building something for the future. The Jaguars, their future is here, and it's now. And if they can't fix it, Doug Peterson might honestly be the first head coach can, which is shocking to see. I will say my bigger concern are the Bengals. You are in a situation where you're about to lose some more stars on offense, whether it's T. Higgins, maybe they trade Jamar Chase if they think he's too expensive, and you have really no talent on the defensive side. You can't stop the run. You can't, as we saw last night, stop some of these deep passes, and that's worrisome. If you can't stop things on defense and your offense isn't clicking, then you start having to reshuffle and rebuild this thing. And Zach Taylor, he might be on the hot seat in the next couple of weeks if they don't figure this out. I mean, if they lose to the Panthers and they drop to 0-4 when they're expected to be in wild card contention for the AFC North, that's going to raise a few heads. There were a lot of concerns about the Jaguars coming into the season, but I think a lot of people thought the Bengals were better than them. And for both of them to kind of be in the cellar of the AFC South, or not AFC South, the AFC, I think really out of this group, the Bengals are the worrisome team for me.
You mean when they lose to the Panthers this week? I will say, and I assume they're going to lock up Jamar Chase. I think just having those two guys there and Chase and Burrow is some hope. And like I said, they have started slow and have rallied from it, so maybe they know what they're doing there. But it is certainly concerning for them. That defense was quite horrible. I saw a lot of people saying that was the worst pass rush performance they've ever seen. Last night versus Washington, who coming into the season, we did not say Washington had a stout offensive line. So that was quite a shocker to me there. And hopefully we're able to take advantage of that. The next group I want to talk about is there's a ton of 1-2 teams. Actually, 18 teams are below 500 right now. So 1-2 or 0-3. And the next group I want to mention is like the division winners, teams that we thought could be in contention to win their divisions. Sometimes we might have picked them for a lot of these.
Well, 3 of these teams won their division last year.
Right. Yeah. You're right. 3 of them. First one, Dallas. We talked about Dallas a little bit. I think their defensive problems, specifically in their linebacker and personnel department, super, super rough there. I'm not sure they're going to be able to fix the defense personnel wise, so it's going to have to be schematically. We'll see what Zimmer has. And then real quick, Baltimore 1-2. I'm not super concerned with them. They had a rough go of it week 1 versus the Chiefs. The Raiders game, yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but they were able to get the win versus Dallas this past week. San Francisco, that one we might need to talk a little bit about. And then Atlanta, a team you tabbed as being probably worse than people think. They're off to a 1-2 start as well, and their one win was a come from behind victory. So maybe things are up in the air there, but I think for me, it's got to be San Francisco. That's the team I'm most concerned about with this group, and it's not so much that they're 1-2. It's they're 1-2, and Brandon Ayuk isn't good anymore, and Christian McCaffrey's in Germany to get his leg looked at. We didn't think he'd be in Germany in week 3, right? That's like this is way worse than we think. George Kittle is in and out. Deebo Samuel's missing some time. Trent Williams is close to 40. So and Brock Purdy is not functioning as well without all those guys. That's the big concern for me. And then on defense, the defense is much, much worse this year with their in-house guys and Brandon Staley than it was with Steve Wilkes. And a lot of that has to do with
is their defensive coordinator, but yeah,
right.
Staley is.
But he came from within the within the organization. Yeah. And they did lose some pieces on defense, but the Niners, man, I think your Seahawks love earlier in the preseason might have some ground to it if the Niners keep playing like this.
I have a couple of tweets saved. I know some people called me ludicrous for saying the Seahawks would win the division, but right now, them sitting at 3-0 and the 49ers at 1-2 and looking a little bit shaky from the injury department, I think they're definitely up there. For me, the Cowboys, after a really impressive win against the Browns, I didn't expect from them. You fall flat against the Saints and then the Ravens at home, and that is surprising. I mean, I think they had won, was it 12, maybe even 16 straight games at home? It was like the longest streak that was active up until the Saints beat them. But it's these offenses that are able to get bigger, get in the 12, 21. The Ravens even showed, I believe, a 22 personnel look. And the way that Mike Zimmer has these defensive linemen spaced, it's like pre-snap, you know that the team's just going to gash them. And if you can't stop the run, then that's just going to open up the passing game. And I understand analysts want to say, well, the run doesn't set up the pass. I'm not so sure about that. There are things I want to work on to kind of go against that narrative, because I think a lot of times when people look at it, it's like, okay, they just want to see a correlation between run and pass and not formation setup and looks and tendencies defenders are looking for both on tape and on the field. But in regards to the Cowboys, Mike Zimmer is not able to stop what Dan Quinn failed to stop. And you're going to go up against these style offenses that can get bigger and more physical in the trenches. I mean, the Lions and Packers are still some of the better teams in the NFC. Like, you're not going to be able to move throughout not only your own conference, but the playoffs if this continues. So I don't know what the schematic answer for them is. And that's probably my biggest concern out of this group. We've seen flashes from the 49ers. Obviously, the defense has regressed, but the offense is still efficient. I mean, Juwan Jennings was a stud against the Rams. I mean, that guy dropped, I believe it was like 45-plus fantasy points, had 3
Lucky
touchdowns.
You, right?
Oh, he was on the bench. Yeah. He was on the bench. But yeah, no, it's one of those things where they're still showing they can churn it out on offense. Jordan Mason has looked good in Christian McCaffrey's departure, but if they can't put it all together and they keep losing games, that's where it's like you're a fringe wild card team. You are not this dominant Super Bowl contender that you paid all these guys on your roster to beat. And that is definitely a disappointment from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think for me, San Francisco is the most worrying for me. It's because they expect a Super Bowl. That's their, if you listen to the Athletic Football Show, what's a successful season for them? Super Bowl. That's
Super Bowl or bust.
That is the mark for them. Like you said, they paid all these guys. They got Purdy coming up. They didn't opt to trade Deebo in the offseason. They kept Brandon Ayuk. Even though they had a trade in place, he said he wanted to stay. So you have everything you need there, Kyle Shanahan and company. It's time to put your feet on the ground and get there, I guess. And if these injuries aren't letting them be a hyper efficient number 1, number 2 offense, and the defense has regressed to not be able to support that, play complementary football, that's the worry for me. And then Atlanta, like the Bucks and the Saints, we'll have to see.
The NFC South. We talked about this in the offseason.
And the NFC South, I will say, we're all within a game right now. And a lot of divisions are like that. It's only been 3 weeks, but I think the NFC South is certainly competitive enough to where any team, maybe not the Panthers still, but any team could really jump up and take that division crown. The last group I want to talk about, and there's obviously a lot more 1 and 2 teams. Like the Panthers are there, the Patriots are there. I have a list of them here. The Giants are there, the Broncos are there, and the Cardinals are there. I don't think any of those teams really care about their record right now. None of those teams had super high expectations to begin with, at least from our understanding. But this last group, the playoff hopefuls group, maybe the wild card bubble group, Indianapolis is 1 and 2, Cleveland's 1 and 2, Miami's 1 and 2, Chicago is 1 and 2, and the Rams are 1 and 2. I don't know what angle you want to take here. For me, I'm going to go with Indy, just because Anthony Richardson has looked not unplayable, but really, really rough. And to me, he's regressed from week to week. This past week, I did not think he played well, like at all. And we're going to have to see growth from him, because we saw, and I said it like 41,000 times when we talked about the Colts this offseason, we saw what he could do with just like a mid to a bad veteran journeyman QB. He needs to make it work with Anthony Richardson.
I'm not as concerned with the Colts. You turn on the tape with the Packers, there's a lot of drop passes. And for me, and why the Packers are being mentioned in the same breath, they had a slower start with Jordan Love last year. And this was a guy that had 3+ years of NFL experience before taking the field as a starter. Obviously, Anthony Richardson didn't have a lot of playing time at Florida, has dealt with injuries. He seems to be healthy right now. And some of the deep shots, like he had a nice pass to Alec Pierce down the sideline. The running game with him there, with Jonathan Taylor, opens up a lot of different things to allow Shane Steichen to have guys just running wide open down the field. I think if he settles down, marries his eyes to his feet a little bit better, he can make more accurate passes and start being a quarterback that you can build around. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, you may have to turn to a backup. I believe their backup is Joe Flacco, who's definitely a competent backup if you're trying to make a push and save your job and show that you can compete in the NFL and you deserve to be a head coach at this level. So we'll see how that comes together. I'm not as worried about with Indy. I'm more worried about, I would say, out of these teams listed here, probably the Cleveland Browns. I wasn't high on the Rams. The Bears have a rookie quarterback and some other new pieces that they're all still trying to figure out. For me, the Browns is you go out in the offseason, you go, okay, we're going to dedicate to being 11 personnel team, get a couple more wide receivers, trade for a Jerry Jeudy, I think guarantee a lot of Cooper's contracts, and really build this thing around Deshaun Watson and maybe even Jameis Winston. And they're falling flat on their face. I mean, they were down 21-7 against the Giants. And for me, if you have that much talent on defense and you're allowing Malik Neighbors to do what he's doing, you're not scheming that out properly. And so Jim Schwartz, I think, is taking a step back. He needs to elevate his game. And Kevin Stefanski, if the answer is not with Deshaun Watson, you got to go to the backup quarterback. I don't care how much money you have locked up with Deshaun Watson. You have too much talent on that team to be wasting it and be 1 and 2, especially when the AFC North is still a very viable division. The Ravens are 1 and 2, just like the Browns. The Bengals are 0 and 3. And it's very easy, in my opinion, to catch up to the Steelers when the Steelers still have to play everybody in the AFC North.
For sure. We know Jameis will sling it, right?
Exactly.
And half of them will be interceptions, but half of them will be touchdowns too. So kind of what he dealt with Joe Flacco last year, which got him to the playoffs. Maybe he needs to make that switch sooner rather than later. The only other team I would point out are the Miami Dolphins. Clearly, without Tua, the system doesn't work. We talk about, Tua's built in the system. You see how it works without him, how bad it is. So you got to give him credit for getting the ball out as quickly as he does, his ability to mitigate pressure. Skylar Thompson's just getting beaten up out there. He's injured now too. We'll have to see with them, but I think as long as Tua's on the sidelines and we don't get a viable replacement in there, I think the Dolphins don't really have the firepower to compete. I will say their defense has played better early in the season than it did at the end of last year, but we will have to see there.
This isn't a team that's going to be competitive. Yeah. And we're definitely going to kind of segue into the next segment, but it's just with the Dolphins, you lose Tua to injury. The team's gassed. They came out flat. I think they went down 17-3 within the first quarter, and I think the game like wrapped up like 24-3 or something. So it's one of those things that the Dolphins at this point have imploded, and it's really just up to Mike McDaniel to salvage this season, find a competent quarterback play. Maybe he does trade for a guy like Bryce Young or somebody that he thinks can operate his offense, especially with the weapons they have in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So we'll see what he can do to salvage it. For me, it's hard to put them in that category of a disappointment when you lose your starting quarterback in week 2, and he really should retire. Like, for his health, he is going to live longer than he would play this game, and that really should be the priority. So with that
he got paid too as well. Like did. That's something you got to consider. As far as like quarterbacking goes, the current Miami Dolphins quarterbacks, not where it's at. We can just say that. But best performances this week we wanted to highlight were journeyman QBs not on the teams that drafted them, in Malik Willis's case. But I think Andy Dalton, Sam Darnold, Malik Willis, a lot of the guys we talked about with good coaching infrastructures and stuff, all of them performed super well. Andy Dalton is the only QB so far this season with 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. I don't know if Josh Allen or Joe Burrow did that. Burrow might have, because he had quite a bit of yardage at the end of the game there.
Josh Allen only had he had sub 300 yards, but he had 4 passing touchdowns.
Yeah, Burrow and Daniels might have been there as well. Prior to Monday, Andy Dalton was the only one. Sam Darnold.
Joe Burrow joined him, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns.
300 exactly? Wow.
It was 324.
Okay.
But yeah, over that threshold of being that.
Darnold, 4 touchdowns versus Houston Texans defense, which is pretty decent. He was kind of carving up Stingley in that secondary in that game. And then Malik Willis, 202 passing yards and a passing touchdown, 73 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Worked out well. We talked about how Matt LaFleur is catering to him, and he got the this was versus the Titans this week, right? It was the revenge game for him. I like his
revenge game for LaFleur too. I mean, he was the XOC there.
His candor in the post-game presser was all wins count the same. That's what Malik Willis says, which is super professional to say, but you got to enjoy it a little bit more. I know I would if I were in his shoes, but that's kind of the theme of this week, is like sometimes it's not where you're drafted, it's where you end up with good coaching. That's how we've seen a lot of these journeymen or younger QBs perform well to start this season. Andy Dalton isn't a young QB, but he has performed well in the one game he's played. We need to see it happen again this week versus his Cincinnati Bengals when they come to town. And obviously the biggest thing is it's his revenge game, right? He played 9 or 10 seasons there, 7 straight playoff appearances there, led them to, I think, 4 or 5 AFC North Division crowns. That's when Flacco was still kicking up in Baltimore. That's when the Killer Bees were in Pittsburgh. That's what we're not going to talk about the Browns. They were not very good during that time, but he had the Bengals on the map, him and AJ Green. So we need to see him play like he did back then, maybe light him up. I think we need to continue to lean into the run game. Their defensive line, not super stout, and we need to take those shots downfield. They're just asking for it with their safeties there, and hopefully we're able to take advantage of them. One thing I wanted to note before I pass it to you, the game last night between the Bengals and the Washington Commanders. This was on both ends, so you got to blame Washington as well. This was the first time since 1940 that there were no turnovers and no punts. So, hey, if they're going to let us keep scoring, I like that, but we need to force turnovers against them. We have turnovers the past couple of weeks. We need to keep it going.
We've seen quarterbacks come into Carolina, and despite some of the other deficiencies that our team has shown over the past year or so, with Evero being the defensive coordinator, we've limited the aerial attack, and their rushing game doesn't really impress me. They don't have the offensive line that the Los Angeles Chargers had.
And they lose Trent Brown last night as well. So Amarius Mims will be starting. Talented rookie, but still a rookie. Maybe somebody Jadeveon Clowney could take advantage of.
Personally, I think Mims is better than Trent Brown, so getting him into the lineup, I think, is smart. I think Clowney, being a veteran, might be able to take advantage of that on a play or two, but that is a matchup to key in and look for. For me, on defense, it's more just make sure you take away the explosive play, make them earn everything. If they're going to go down the field, like, make them earn every single yard that they're picking up. On offense, I really think we just need to keep handing it off to Chuba Hubbard. We saw a lot of open lanes set up by this offensive line. If you weren't going to do play action with Andy Dalton, and I know you brought up a great point about his mobility, run some pistol looks that you had. And they had some success with that running. Fake that, have a play action to where you have a couple deep shots off that, because you're going to force 8-man boxes because they aren't going to be able to stop the run with 7. And if we can do that, we can get bigger, we can play more physical, we're going to be able to control the ball a lot more. And as long as we aren't turning over the ball, this is a game that we very much can win. Do I think we're going to win it? I'm not exactly sure. I want to hear some injury reports. This is a desperate team that still has a lot of competent players on both sides of the ball. And it will be curious to see if Andy Dalton can repeat what he did against the Raiders, because some of the throws he was making were absolutely elite. And to expect that week in and week out from a journeyman quarterback who's about to turn 37 is a lot to ask.
For sure. You always have to worry about Burrow chasing Higgins, right? What we talked about last week, taking away Adams and Bowers, I think it might be a little more difficult just because of Higgins' vertical ability. The corners are really going to be tested. I think Horn and Jackson both had phenomenal games, but Jamar Chase is a bit of a different animal than Devontae Adams. Adams might have a more well-rounded career, but Chase is a lot younger, a lot faster, a lot more juice. So that's going to be a big key there. You have to pressure Burrow. Burrow's really good when he's not pressured. And like you said, he's one of the best diagnosticians before the play. You got to mix some stuff up too. I know Evero likes to be kind of, all right, this is what we're doing. Beat us here. We're going to keep stuff in front of us. But sometimes you might need to mix some stuff up defensively to confuse Burrow a bit. Offensively, I like what you bring up with the pistol sets. I like what we talked about last week with the 21 and 12 personnel. Because Adam Thielen's going to be missing time, I expect to see a lot of Mingo, a lot of Xavier Legette, and what
playing slot. Like
to the running point, I think you can put Chuba or Miles Sanders back there, and I think you can put Mingo or XL back there with him. You got to remember at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin used Mingo in the wing a ton. He was a big wing back player for him there. I like I don't necessarily like Mingo getting like the jet sweeps and stuff, but we know he can move horizontally fast. We know how fast Legette can move. Maybe get them in the backfield to do some work there as blockers or as maybe like sneaky like leak players. It reminds me of when we played Dallas in Dallas back in 2021 with Darnold. It was when we started 3-0. When we had DJ Moore line up in the backfield after I believe it was McCaffrey got hurt. That's the kind of stuff I think could be an interesting wrinkle in the offensive game there, because I expect the tight ends to be important, especially with the lack of Thielen. Work in the middle, we're really going to have to see. And my final note, Jalen Coker got promoted. It's time to get the Coke heads involved there. Want to see what he can do. I know we were big fans of him there and super excited. He's on the 53 now. Would love to get him more involved, because outside of Johnson, Mingo, and Legette, David Moore does not inspire confidence for me as a downfield receiving threat. So we'll have to see what Coker can do.
Yeah, the best David Moore is going to offer is being like a guy that's going to convert third downs, be a reliable target.
Jarius Wright, right?
Yeah,
Jarius
Wright light at that. Jarius Wright was goated for some of his 2018 catches and performances that year with Cam Newton. So everything you said, just want to harp on that again. I think if we're able to run the ball, get bigger, use Xavier Legette and Jonathan Mingo in creative ways, I think they're best used in the slot, and that's where Thielen operates out of. So if they can start taking some of those reps and show that they're kind of the future for the wide receiver room, I think Thielen is a solid candidate to be cut next offseason from a cap standpoint. And I think if he continues to slow up, these injuries become an issue, those two guys that we've drafted over the past 2 years got to step up and be bigger playmakers in this offense in that role. So want to see more of that on defense. Like you said, eliminate the explosive plays. I'm kind of back and forth if I would want like JC Horn on T Higgins and no safety help, or put like JC Horn on Jamar Chase, maybe with some safety help. And then I think with as physical as Mike Jackson is, he can really pair with T Higgins. And at that point, it's just taking away those tertiary options and Andrei Yoshevich and Mike Gesicki. And I think with that being said, we are in a perfect segue in the Purrfect Takes. You hit the head on the nail. Chuba Hubbard got 100 rushing yards. The Saints, unfortunately, couldn't even score above 20. I said they would have a 40-piece and walk away with the dub. This week, my perfect take is I think Andrei Yoshevich, who I think is really going to be the X factor for the Bengals on offense, he'll lead the team in targets and receptions. I think he is really going to be that safety valve and really probably one of their bigger answers for moving the ball against us on Sunday.
I really like that. We've seen when the defense performs well, it is those third, fourth options that are the dangerous weapons for the opposing teams. Last week we saw it. And with Jordan Fuller going on IR today, it was announced a couple hours ago, we're really going to be stretched with how our safeties move and operate. So I like that one. I think the Red Rifle, El Rifle Rojo, as some people on Twitter are calling him, is going to get a successful revenge game, and he's going to lead the Panthers to scoring 4 touchdowns, at least 4. I don't know if he's going to throw for 4. I doubt it. But we had 5 versus the Raiders, and as much as the Raiders defense, how bad it was not as bad as what I saw the Bengals do last week against Cliff Kingsbury's college offense and a rookie QB. I think if Canales can scheme some yak like he's able to before, get creative with some players in the backfield, we should be more than capable of scoring 4 or more touchdowns. So I like the Panthers to do that there, and hopefully we can meet again here next Tuesday with another dub to talk about.
Yeah, no, that would make it 4, which would double all it would match the wins that we had last year. But as a podcast, we've only talked about 3 wins so far on this podcast. So raking them in that way, doubling the wins from last year would be a huge success for this team, like we talked about. So yeah, no, I think outside of what we talked about, what is probably the thing that you're keying on Sunday the most? Like what is tantalizing you most about the matchup with the Bengals? Is it the run game? I know your take was around Andy Dalton. Do you think Deontay Johnson has a huge game? What is kind of the big thing you're looking for?
Well, it's actually on defense. I just want to see how Horn and Jackson match up against Higgins and Chase. That's like what I'm going to be looking for, because super electric guys like you're talking about. And our corners have been physical, strong to start the year. And last week we didn't talk about it, but man, they like batted down like maybe 4 or 5 catches or close catches. And they would get their hand in there and smack it and get the ball out. We need some of that. What we also need is you guys to follow, subscribe. You know, we're on Twitter, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. Go to YouTube, like the video, dislike the video if you don't agree with our takes. They are perfect, however, so you will kind of have to agree with them. But thanks for listening, guys. We look forward to getting on here and talking next week, and we're looking forward to another Panthers dub. So after all that, we will catch you guys next week.